With the current civil unrest in our nation, our country, there's a lot of talk about the black man and the black male, particularly the African American in America. And for closing of our Men's Month, received some great messages coming from our men. We've had some great teachings on Tuesday night coming from our men. And so tonight we want to close out. Today we'd like to close out um, with a discussion about the black male experience in America. And on my left, we have Brother Lionel Allen, and we have on my right, we have Brother uh, Donald Clark, and we have in the center, we have Deacon Joseph Frank, and we have the son, amen, of Brother Donald, Dante. And soon to come in, making his way in will be Brother Reggie Caldwell. We have a few other men that is not going to be able to make it on tonight, but we're grateful, for those that are here on this evening. And I believe this will be a great discussion, in particular what we are experiencing in our current time. So we have just in our sheets, we have a channel of discussions that we're just going to just brief over, and we just going to openly as men just share our experiences, what we have experienced as men growing up in America, and not only that, but then also share our experiences, how we have dealt with it and how we have coped with it, and with the guidance that we may have had, with a father. So. America has painted an image of black males that have diminished the character of black males for generations since slavery. The image that has been portrayed of black males, and when you even think of black males, are at times to be a problem or problems. Black males are troubled, thieves, gangsters, drug dealers, deadbeats. And sometimes in terms of deadbeats mean that, they're leaving baby mamas, and lazy, or disrespectful, violent, absent. We hear these terms, put out into the atmosphere, into society, about us. And so we just want to just share just briefly about how we feel, about these particular words in particularly, and how you feel that it expresses you and your character and your personality as a black male. Brother Allen?
So that's a pretty in-depth topic. I'll try to keep it light. We struggle with many layers of discrimination. And I think part of it is the presentation that we've had, as you mentioned, Pastor. So despite your socioeconomic background, despite your actual race in this country, despite your ethnicity or even your sex, you have been convinced of a one common enemy. And in many situations, that enemy has been painted as a black man, and even amongst ourselves. So there's a duality to the discrimination that we face, and it occurs on many levels. Me, myself, I've often told people I only look African American. I'm not actually African American. My experience growing up was not the atypical African American experience. I'm first generation American. My family's all from the Caribbean, so I'm Afro-Caribbean. So many of the ideologies, the food, the music, the culture was different for me. And growing up on the East Coast, I experienced discrimination from African Americans who saw me as a black man from a different culture as a threat to their income, their presence in society. So I think that conditioning and that message, when people talk about systemic racism, and they say there really isn't systemic racism, I would argue that there's systemic racism in media, in language, and it may not be in corporate structures, it may not be in any legal structure, but it's in our culture. And we've been conditioned to assess one another based on that presentation. So first we assess each other as threats, and then we begin to break our walls down and look at each other as peers and mentors and teachers and students and brothers. That usually comes as a second effort for us. It's not natural.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah, well, I can agree any more, Pastor. I think one of the issues or challenges that we see here, the African American male probably shouldered a lot of the historical burdens of society. If you look at the person that worked the hardest, it was the African American male. There's not anyone that did any sort of field work. You go back to picking cotton and doing tobacco and agricultural work without any John Deeres or Caterpillars. That was done on the backs of African Americans. But one of the ways that they marginalized or kept people in check was to project the same thing that they were essentially going through on African Americans. So if you want to keep somebody working harder, you may just keep telling them that they're being lazy, etc. So the other thing I think that's unfortunate is sometimes myths have a greater impact than truths. So if you look at someone who plays a doctor on General Hospital for 20 years, later on they're making a Bayer or Advil commercial. So we've fallen victim to that. But the good news here is the only water in a boat that sinks you is the water that you take on. So what I want to say around this is I've made it a point of creating my own script and rejecting any untrue scripts that are placed upon me. Anyone else?
Amen.
Any thoughts on that? Okay, we'll go to the next.
I did want to add something to what you said, and then as we were exchanging mics, the fleeting thought went by. When you spoke about that same projection from it's predominantly in the media.
Yeah.
So we have to understand that there was a distinct shift in culture from and within white America. So as we just are on the tail end of celebrating Juneteenth, when a black man was a commodity and was working to build revenue, he was a hard worker. When a black man became independent and had to build the revenue for his own economy and family, he's lazy. Yep. So it's a very interesting dichotomy that was presented to us. So that's when I talk about the media and that presentation. A lot of times we as African Americans have to realize how we were presented to each other was wrong. Right. And that was done through education, that was done through media, that was done through movies, that was done through entertainment. And that is the system, if you will, that I think that still exists, that's being exploited. Like you said, people begin to trust these stereotypes that have been played out in movies and other iterations, and then they single it out in the news media, and then it propagates this same one facet of a culture, when every culture has its tendencies and crimes that it's prone to. But the interesting thing is to put us in a particular space and category that increases that. So you marginalize us geographically. So if you look at particularly, predominantly, even to this day, Black communities, the travel to where business centers are particularly longer than our peers of
Right.
other races. So there's a lot of different, when you talk about systems, there's a lot of different systems that are ingrained in there, but it is key for us to unlearn certain things that we've been taught and presented about us as a brotherhood, and sort of challenge that, just like you said, and create our own definition. Because essentially, what is money? Money is only the value that we assess to it, right? It
Yep.
is just ink on paper, but we assess a value and we stick to that moniker and we trade, we build businesses, lifestyles, livelihoods just based on that language and that idea. Once we begin to change the language and idea, then I think that's where the liberty begins. But it's not necessarily in a pronouncement like Juneteenth.
Yep.
Amen.
I was just looking at the 10 examples as trouble, thieves, gangsters, drug dealers, deadbeats, lazy, disrespectful, violent, absent. It's mostly all that's been a process of however old you are. It was a process that you processed it in your mind and start acting out those characters, whichever one it is. But if you change the way you think, those characters right there don't define who you are. It's all in your mind, and in the process changing, you could change all that to do better and be a better person.
Amen. We have to not allow the stereotypes, amen, to define, amen, exactly who we are, because we know that we are created, amen, in God's image and in his likeness, amen. He said that we were good, amen, amen. We're going to move on. Being a black man means being afraid. And now this kind of has connotations two ways. This can work two ways. Black man being afraid of society or being afraid, of being black, because we're black, so therefore we kind of diminish ourselves. Or other races being afraid of us because we are black male.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Well, I'll answer that one. So a lot of this goes way back to slavery. If you look at one of the things that, if you want to keep people in check, you create distances. And so you create distances with that myth, especially the myth of a black man looking to rape everyone or that type of thing. So it's one of the ways that systemically was used to create distance with a black male. And right now we're even seeing that today, is that there's this unnecessary fear. And no one has anything to fear from these good brothers up here, myself included, but there's still that myth. For me personally, as it relates to maybe being stopped by a police officer or whatever, I'm not fearful of anything, but I'm aware and I'm concerned. And I think for African American men, it's important that we bring a cool head, particularly in hot situations, and we stay aware in those situations. But I would not encourage anyone to live in fear, and I refuse to live in fear myself.
Amen. Amen. Any other thoughts? Okay. It is a myth that black men have targets on their backs.
We all know that was not a myth. We are targeted. I think the target. We are targeted. The targeting begins early. However, the end game is the same, and it really brings us right back to our biblical principles. The end game is to remove the man from the household. If the black man possesses the power that the Bible says that we are the shepherds of our own households. Without a shepherd, the flock is lost. And if we have, as a culture, have embraced the absence of the black man, and it's been promoted as an option and not a mandate. And then there's government subsidies and programs that our sisters can be involved with to replace the income. So then you think that by replacing the income, the individual's replaced. But the Bible is clear that Christ's love for us as the church is a husband and bridegroom relationship, right? And that the household is a reflection of heaven. So I think that is why the target exists on many levels. It exists in our school system when our young brothers are targeted as being disrespectful or being disruptive when they're simply not engaged, when the curriculum that's presented to them is below their threshold and the expectation is very low for them. So the energy is still there. It comes out differently, right? Without a direction. So I think the end game shows up a lot of different ways. Like the brother said, it may show up in racial profiling when you're driving your car or trying to buy a house or trying to buy that car that you like. It may show up in different ways, but the end target is the same. It's ultimately to remove us from the household, because once we're outside of the household, then the next generation is growing without direction and without education, and without mentorship, and without training, ultimately. And that comes back to the previous point of being disrespectful and not having an ear for authority. And I think that's what we struggle with as Black men, and we have to be real about it. The lack of the father in the household drove our young men to not have an ear for authority. And so when they hear authority, it challenges them emotionally, and they respond emotionally to something that's a training problem. Because the first time they're going to hear authority is when somebody's telling them to get out or stop or where's your ID or whatever it is. That can't be the point that you come in contact with authority. You need to have come in contact with the, didn't I tell you not to do that? and the voice that's saying it has some bass in it. So I think that is one of the struggles that we have as a culture is the way Black men have been systematically removed from the household. And then it challenges the next generation and the generations after that.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I'm going to say not only do we have a target on our backs, but we have a target on our necks. And I say that jokingly, but that's the reality situation. And what I want to add as I was listening here is we need to be aware of not only the hard targets, but the soft targets. So the hard target is, police brutality, arrest, in your face racism. I hit up against some soft targets. I remember being in the 8th grade and coming home and telling my mom, hey, I'm going to go back to the teacher tomorrow and ask him to upgrade me from this remedial math to pre-algebra because I could do the stuff in my sleep. Or the soft target might be, I think we teach our young African-American men, we need to teach them the power of and. Because a lot of times it's like you're either a good student or you're an athlete. Or they teach a young sister girl, you're very pretty or you're smart. And what I want to teach the young African-American men is the power of and. You're a great athlete and you're a great student. You're very pretty and you're a good student. So we need to be aware of the hard targets on our back and the soft targets on our back.
Amen. I like that term, hard targets and soft targets, and that is so true. I mean, and particularly, man, when they want to place you in one category and then keep you in that one category, and then you can't do anything else but this, and it's just one dimensional, and that's exactly what it is. And there's an extreme fear of black men has been projected by white Americans that has sown seed of discord adopted by other races about black men. Likewise, there's an extreme fascination about the black man by whites and other races. And I can say just particularly, not just only in this nation, but when you go to other countries, other nationalities are very fascinated about black men, I mean, and particularly black culture. And you'll be surprised, even in Japan, is that they love the black culture. They love black music. So how do you feel about this obscured view of being a black man, and what you have, what are some of your experiences have been um, dealing with being fascinated, but then also being hated at the same time?
Well, I think that in some ways the fascination is good in that it honors the deep complexity of black male, the culture, the richness in certain things, maybe even athletic capabilities and stuff. But it's a two-edged sword, and it's a two-edged sword in that if we fall prey to that, to some of those what I would call stereotypes, is that it paints us only into a box and a corner. And the truth is, the African American man is as diverse as any other man on the planet. We have some of the smartest people. If you look at the history of the Egyptians and in our prowess in intelligence, as far as math, science, history, we're about as diverse intellectually as we are physically, as we are spiritually. So I think sometimes the fascination and the honoring of our culture is great. That's one side of the sword, but the negative side of that sword is sometimes it can sort of paint us into a one-dimensional corner that is not representative of the strength and broad-based diversity of our culture. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm still thinking about it. This is true. The black man, not just by slavery, migration, and transition, has been dumped on many different continents and within various cultures. The fear of black men, I've found, is predominant in North America. I've seen a little bit in other places, but the height of the temperature of the fear factor due to media is in North America. I challenge most black people I know to even get to parts of South America. You'll be shocked how many people that are darker than you that live in South America and speak Spanish, and still even dialects of the original African language. So when you get outside of America, in the Caribbean and Latin America, like you mentioned, even parts of Europe, I don't think there's the same hatred for black men. But I will say with the I forget the word that you used, where the interest comes. I find that the fascination. I find the fact that people are intrigued means that they're open-minded. And I think that's where we have a moment right now in history. I think melanated people as a whole right now, I don't recall a time since biblical history that we are global news, despite being a target for free labor. Like when the slave trade was enacted, we were global news then, but we were global news because we were a commodity. I think that is still going to play a part. There will be a lot of capitalization that happens off of melanated people just because of a lot of the various movements that are enacting. You will see legislation change, but ultimately it will come down in North America to white people holding each other accountable for their image of the black man. I wish I could say we had the power to change it. Um, that is the most humbling thing I think of it all, is to recognize you do not have the power to see how people um, see you. They really own that power, and certain jokes your coworkers won't make around you, but they will make them around their other white partners. So they again have to begin to hold each other accountable for that. And in our turn of holding it, we have to hold the banner of the new profile, that new facet, whatever it is, to have them see the black man in a new way. So it's a like a duality to it. Again, it's a bipartisan relationship. They have to hold each other accountable to their image of us and what they propagate to their children and their co-workers and their friends, and we have to hold ourselves and our communities accountable to the higher moral standard.
Mm-hmm.
Black men have to subject themselves to being less than who they are so that other races may feel better about themselves. What is your view on this?
There's some truth to that myth, but my advice to any African American man is own your strength, whether that strength is a combination of spiritual strength, physical strength, mental strength, psychological strength. Own that, because that is actually a litmus test for people that are friends and allies versus people that are enemies. Because somebody that's a true friend will want you to thrive and succeed and do well around them. And to the extent that my success or my thriving is offending somebody, then that's a nice litmus test or clear picture that I don't want to be around that person myself. So I own my strength, not only to own it, but it's also a litmus test, because the moment I feel like I got to diminish or do something to make somebody feel better, then I know that's not somebody I want to be around.
Amen. Can we experience this? And I'm saying this. Can we experience this corporately?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if I'm working with somebody that's working for leadership or whatever, I support them to win. I don't necessarily show them up in a negative way, but I think it's important that we don't diminish who we are. And I used to see that a lot when I was in high school. I had some friends on the basketball team, and it drove me crazy because they might be intelligent. They say, "Oh man, I'm just getting a C in my class. I'm trying to stay eligible to play basketball." But there was something cool about diminishing their own intelligence that I didn't understand it because I was trained differently. One of the things I was actually proud of in high school is I did something called academic decathlon, which is basically competing in the classroom. Academic decathlon, you did things like essays, there's science, math, etc. And what I was extremely proud of is competing against folks in academic decathlon that could not hang with me on the field, vice versa, competing against people on the field that weren't anywhere near academic decathlon. So I think we got to teach our young African American men to be Renaissance men as we were in the original days.
Amen. Amen. I say that and imply this, and because I believe it also that it's in the corporate. My experiences with it, it's kind of in two ways. Actually, I worked in the design field in architecture, and so I was pretty much the only African American in whatever firm that I worked at. I was the only African American. I was the only black person, and so they would always place somebody with me to train. And to train them and show them how to do certain things. But then when it came to the next position, they got it and not me. I'm good enough to train, and to teach them how to do it, but I'm not good enough to, to take the office or the position. Welcome, Brother Reggie. We're just gonna keep moving. We're on number. We're gonna move forward, amen, to number 6. There's a myth that black men make up the hatred and mistreatment received from whites and other races in power. There's a myth. Or do we make it up? Do we make up all this mistreatment that we go through?
No.
Do we make up that, is it, because sometimes they try to say, oh, there's no racism, or you're not hated. Something occurs, something happened on the job, and then they say, don't. They quickly to say it's not prejudice, it's not racism, and so do we make this up? Do we feel that we make this up? Young brother, you want to have some words on that?
All right. You want to have some? Well, so I'll say what I said, and I'll pass you the mic. It's not that we need cell phone cameras to see that this stuff is not made up. Once upon a time when we had the Rodney King days, you had to have a camera like this gentleman is holding in order to catch some of these things in the act. And so the fact, it's not that there was, I think sometimes, and bless them, a lot of my Caucasian friends might think, wow, there's a rise in this activity happening. And I'm here to say there's not really a rise in the activity, there's just a rise in phone cameras capturing the activity. But if anything, the activity probably might have leveled off or flattened off or been the same or even less in the past. But there's a greater documenting of the activity. And as depressing as it can be for people, I like for truth to come up to the surface, good or bad. And so I'm not happy about some of these truths coming to the surface, but I think the truths coming to the surface forced us to actually deal with it.
Yes.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
Okay, we'll move on. Who would you say you are as a black man? We can kind of leave this one a little later, and I'll move on. There's a long history involving the police force and black males. What are some of your experiences as a black male? And I can share myself that I had numerous experiences. My dad was in business and had a body shop and in San Pablo. And so when I grew up learning how to work on cars, and so when I got old enough to drive, I ended up having this Mazda RX-7. And we put a nice hot candy apple red paint job on this Mazda RX-7. So I got all kind of attention, all kind of attention from the police. And they would stop me for any cause. They just thought that, that I was a trouble kid, that I was in trouble. And they always picked on me and they stopped me for nothing, just made excuse. Your brake light didn't work. And then they wanted to check my glove department. They wanted to check underneath my seats. One time, I was in a different car and I was coming from the Sacramento Valley. And as I crossed the Carquinez Bridge, the police pulled me over, and he told me to get out the car. And so I got out the car, and I thank God for training, because my parents, had always told me that if you get stopped by a police, don't talk back. Just do what they say, to stay alive. Just do what they say and stay alive, and so that was in the back of my mind, you know. And so I got out the car. I did what he what he stated. He said, "Have you been drinking? Have you been smoking?" I said, "No." So he says, "Well, blow into my hand." So I went, blew into his hand. So you know, I haven't been smoking. I don't drink. So he said, "Well, let me see you walk a straight line." You know, so I walked, you know, straight line. Then he decided to put his hands in my pockets. He just went down right into my pockets and just pulled out and went through all my things in my pocket. Then he opened up the passenger car door and opened up the glove department. And this is at the time when I was actually just recently had accepted the call to ministry. And so I had my minister's license that was in the glove department. And so he pulled out, he says, "What is this?" You know. And so I said, "Well, I'm a minister." He said, "You are?" You know. And so it was like a, you know, a kind of like, you know, diminishing my personality and my character. So they handcuffed me and they took me in. They brought me down here to the Richmond police office. Then they set me at the table and they put these things before me and said, "Is that you? Is that you?" And knowing that it wasn't me, you know. So I can say that I, on firsthand, you know, as a African American male, they do pick on you. They do look for certain things, and man, so they can take you in. And particularly, especially if you have an officer that's a racist. Any other?
Well, I'm actually going to add to that. So one of the things I want to do too, as we have this discussion, is I'm going to go another way. First of all, I want to honor all the good police officers that are out there, because sometimes we get caught up in this discussion and we miss that. This is really not even so much a black versus white issue. It's really a good versus evil issue.
Yes.
And so sometimes I see it even in my industry. I'm in investments. And so, you know, you have a ton of people helping clients invest wisely for early retirement, do a number of things. But if you look at, let's say, my career on TV, it might be The Wolf of Wall Street, or, you know, there's a tendency to have
Right.
that. So I
Right.
want to honor the folks that are actually doing a good job, first of all.
Yes.
And I will deal with folks that are doing a bad job. You know, I remembered one time I was helping my brother move. So I've had similar things or questions like, is this your car? Because you're driving a luxury vehicle. But one that really stuck out in my head, I was helping my older brother move into his new house in Benicia. And apparently the new neighbors had called the cops on us. I don't know if lifting heavy furniture out of a U-Haul into a home would constitute stealing. Usually you'd be taking it out of the home
Yes.
into a van or truck, but we're lifting heavy. I mean, we're talking couches. How do you move these things that fast? So couches, tables, et cetera. So I almost lost my cool, but the police officer had asked my brother to basically show some ID. And not only show some ID, but then he needed to personally key his own house. So it's like, okay, this is who I am. I'm Donald Frank. And he basically took his new keys, which he just got a mortgage for and qualified and everything, and basically keyed a couple of doors in his own new house. But the average Caucasian person is obviously not going to have to go through that. But it's important that as African American men that we keep our cool and our composure in moments like these, because a lot of times it's what I call a self-fulfilling prophecy, Brother Reggie, is sometimes they poke the bear hoping for the bear to respond, but that person's got a 470 rifle ready to hit that bear, but they need that bear to come at them so that they can hit the bear. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's important that that bear stays put.
Yes.
So that's my thought.
Amen. Any other thoughts?
Uh, man, a lot of these questions or myths that we've been talking about, or I've been mostly listening, bring so many ideas and thoughts to my mind. I don't even know where to start. I got so much to say. But as far as the police, I say this. As of right now, like I don't really care to even have any conversations with any of them or any interactions. I got a rage that I feel like has been brewing over my lifetime. And it's like my interactions with police, for example, I remember I was 15 years old, was at Richmond High in Spanish class. It was fifth period. It was raining outside. And I just remember hearing a knock at the door. And I go to my Spanish class all the time. I had a B plus in this class. Security guard with 2 police officers come inside. For whatever reason, I thought they was looking for the young man that just left. I'm like, oh, they come looking for him. They don't even know he just got up out of here. And then they come walk straight in front of me. Are you Dante Clark? I started to say no. But then at the same time, it's like, I know I ain't did nothing. So, yeah. Grabbed me, handcuffed me, and took me outside in the rain and pushed me up against the wall. Didn't tell me why they was arresting me. Didn't tell me that I was detained. There was no lawyer present. Didn't call my parents. Just handcuffed me. I'm like, what am I being arrested for? I tell you when you get to the station. So I'm like, the station? I'm thinking this is school police that's gonna take me to the office or something.
Yes.
They took me to San Pablo police station. Didn't tell me why they took me there. So once I get up in there, pretty much was trying to get me to confess to a robbery by asking me if I had any altercations with a Hispanic male at Richmond High. And I was just like, you know how many Mexicans and Latinos go to Richmond High? Like what are you talking about? They wanted me to say that I had an altercation with this young man, so then they can say that I jumped this young man that led to a robbery that they was trying to put up on me. And I was asking, where did they get this information? And all they said was that somebody had pointed me out. That was it. And if I didn't have an alibi of where I was, I could have went to jail for robbery. And that's a felony. You know what I mean? So that was 15 years old. And every interaction I had before then and after then, it's been pretty much hostile. And it was rarely ever a, hey, how you doing, young man? Or what's your name? Or what do you do? It's always been very hostile. And a part of like just what you were saying about as far as like that bear, I feel like that go back to the other question we was talking about, like, have you ever had to diminish who you are in certain environments? And I say, of course. And in America, it's like, first of all, we not allowed to speak our native language. They took that from us. That's our right. That was our first human right, is to be who we are from birth, to speak our native tongue. And we don't have that. So we got to speak the language of our oppressor. So with that right there, it's like when you enter into these spaces, you have already, what's that called? Assimilated into their culture. So that leads to, now I got to shave my beard. I can't wear my locks naturally. I can't wear my tribal garments. I got to wear a certain thing in order to go get this job or a job interview. So the fact that as a young man, I'm like, I don't want to live that way. I want to live the way that I live. I want to wear my hair like this. That automatically is going to make me a target. So anybody can come in and say, the dude with the dreads did it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Not having no proof of anything. They could just say the black man with the dreads did it. So I feel like I've been a target. And it's hard for me to silence that bear when I'm interacting with police. I feel like I done seen too many situations where I seen people who ain't did nothing and comply and still got killed. You feel me? So it's like I'm not finna allow you to what's the word? Just like when you pull me over for a speeding ticket, what makes you think you had a right to search my car, search my person? Like, I'm not on parole. I have no warrants. I have no felonies. If you pull me over for a speeding ticket, you either gonna give me a ticket or let me go. All this other talk
right.
is
That's right.
unnecessary. And it'd be hard for me when I see something on TV of a brother that looked just like me get killed, and then there's another person coming to pull me over and it's trying to exhort their authority, which in this situation it's like it's really uncalled for.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, for those people, it's like man, it hurt, but for me, it'd be difficult. And it's not like I'm trying to be a tough guy or nothing, but my experiences with police is always just being like, they feel like they still slave catching.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if I'm standing outside in my neighborhood with my cousins, they tell us, y'all standing on my block again. When I come back, I'm taking all of y'all to jail.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't even know what type of work that I do.
Yeah.
You don't even know if I'm out here ministering to these brothers, teaching them the word of God. You don't know what we out here doing.
Yeah.
But you gonna come tell me, if I don't leave this block, the next time you come back, I'm gonna go to jail.
Yeah.
And it's like, so it's just for me, it's hard to, when I see a police officer, just automatically just bow down. It's not like I'm trying to fight or nothing like that, but it's just, if you treat me with respect, I'm gonna give you the utmost respect. But I done had too many situations where I was just wrongly accused or just targeted, or they bounce out and think that they can search me. You know what I mean? It's just that's just one of my experiences.
Hey man, just one of the when you were just speaking in terms of the words you're looking for, what kind of went into the back of my mind is that back in the day we used to say that that the officers be profiling, you know, so they profile, they look for certain. There's a profile that they look in, so therefore they're looking for a certain particular characteristics about a black male that they just think and they figure that it's just any black male, so. They profile certain cars, and so they look at a certain car. They look at a certain individual and say, "Well, this is a troubled person." So they stop them, and begin to question them. I mean, without any, like you said, without any particular means of the true reason why that they stopped them. But to move forward, there have been talks all over America. And we've heard this on the news, and there's much discussion about it, about dismantling and or cutting the budget of the police forces across the country. My thought on this is that it's not so much about dismantling or cutting the budget, because as Deacon Frank mentioned, there are respectful officers. And I was taught and raised that the police officer are supposed to be, our protector, are supposed to be, our friend, and I even thought that it would be good, that the police force should be in the community more often. To make certain that the people are comfortable with them, and accustomed with them, and get to know the community where they serve. But because of the history of our nation, and because that I know, I truly believe this, and I truly do understand and seen this and heard it from their mouths. Of other racist groups, the nationalists, the skinheads, the Nazism, Nazis. That at one point of the time in history, it was their intent to get on the police force because it would give them a license to kill, a license to destroy blacks or other races, because particularly, they want to be about the term that we hear all the time, make America great again. Make America great for who? Make America great for, white America, but I feel that there should be, like a stripping down or a purging or cleansing, going through and looking through all the files of the police officers, questioning all the officers, getting any information about officers that may be in particular groups, of hatred, and just cleanse the entire, force out. It could be even just stripping it down to to his bear, and then rebuilding it back up with a new perspective, because they have tried to do policies, over and over and over again, but changing policies or renewing policies is not the answer. So how does some of us feel about this particular subject that we hear?
Well, this one I'm definitely passionate about. I think one of the problems I see in society is we approach everything in this silly all or none scenario. So the all was that, for a while cops and police officers were running amok and not held accountable. The none is we completely defund the police and we have anarchy and there's no law in the land. And I don't know if I can accept that either. Like I said earlier, it's this simple. It's good versus evil. We celebrate, we commendate, we give raises or whatever the good things are to those that are doing good in our society. We recognize them. And we quickly eliminate and cut the ones that are doing bad. And not only do you cut them from one force, but in my career, Brother Reggie, if I mess up, say at Wells Fargo, I have something called a U5 that follows me. It tells if I did something bad in my company, I can't jump over to Charles Schwab or Morgan Stanley or BlackRock or any, because if that thing was bad enough, it'll just banish me from moving from one company to another. But within a lot of police forces, they first of all get a paid vacation, which is called paid leave for messing up. After, if the thing you did is bad enough, then you may go from OPD to San Jose PD or Santa Cruz PD, or if it's hot enough, you go down to LA or you go somewhere else. So I think we just have to have better systems of accountability. And I think the myth that's being perpetuated right now on the defunding of the police, the original thought came about is that, I'll just try to say this as quickly as possible. We went from having 780,000 people approximately incarcerated in 1979, 1980, to currently having north of 2.5 million people. So the war on crime just targeted a lot of black people. And there are a number of things like 3 strikes, you're out, sticking felonies on people and getting them to plea out and certain things. And obviously, you kill probably 70% of the jobs once they get that first charge. So what they're talking about is redirecting some of the resources to point and provide resources to some of these people, because I can promise you this. If you give a man a career and a purpose and direction in life, that man's going to be too busy to get in trouble. And so that's what they're talking about. I'm not a fan of eliminating a police department, but I'm a fan of maybe reducing some of the resources in the police state that we have, the private prisons, some of those things, and putting it in the direction of making our society better while still keeping decent law and order in our community.
I'll make this really quick. I think the problem is much simpler. Sometimes we look at very complex issues and we look for a complex solution. Defunding is not the way to go. I'll just say that right now. If you know anything about economy and how money works, defunding leads to misallocation or misallocation. Anytime you hear the federal government, or any government for that matter, talk about defunding any institution, that is money being stolen. Black people will not get that money. Education sector will not get that money. I've seen the inner workings of how education departments work. My wife is an elected official in West County. Reallocation of funds is not the way to go. If we're talking specifically about policing, privatization of jails, that needs to be repealed.
Yep.
Jails need to be owned by the federal government. If you want to talk about policing, we need to go back to something that was existing in the neighborhoods where I grew up, I'm originally from the East Coast in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up with things called beat cops. You know what a beat cop is? Someone who stands up in your neighborhood all day long. Guess what? They get to know all of y'all and what y'all doing. And they leave y'all alone because they get to realize that y'all just kids having fun in the street and playing ball. So bringing policing down to the community level, parts of the community, as opposed to having police follow a swarm tactic. That's all they do in the city of Richmond. There's a small group of police. They respond to the cameras and the gunshot signals and all the other things that they see at command, and they dispense people when they see crowds of people standing in any one area. It's a swarm mentality. So, my brother, before they got to you, they had an initiative that had nothing to do with you and what you're doing. As he was talking about profiling, all of those things are just directives, and they're human beings. So if you're a human being who's been taught to swarm, we've played football and other sports, what do you do when you get orders that you need to go tackle somebody or swarm them or stop the play? Whether the play is realistic or not, you're going to work counter to it. So if you were embedded in that community, you would be working autonomously to protect that community because you're a part of that community and the community embraces you. So it's just a different mentality. Right now, the police work using technology to swarm to different areas. So I think about that because I grew up, I know we all have different backgrounds, but before I was 12 years old, you want to talk about some sick encounters with police officers? Have you ever stood on a street corner in your underwear at gunpoint? That was a regular occurrence for me in the mornings. But what we have to do, my brother, I would mention, is not internalize what happens. So typically, when bad things happen around you, you can internalize them, and that will affect and erode your character. What you need to begin to do is exactly what the Bible tells us to do. Understand that every experience you go through, remove the victim mentality. It's not someone has done something to you. God has allowed it because it was a part of your character. He wanted to challenge, grow, or encourage. So once we take a slightly different perspective and look at every experience that we go through, it's not what happens to you. A whole bunch of messed up stuff is going to happen to us. It's how we respond to it and how we reflect that God that's indwelling. That Holy Spirit has that aura, and that aura comes out in what you wear and how you wear your hair. I used to have locks for 10 years, so I understand that whole aura. But you have to really sort of dig down and understand that when you're triggered as a man, strip away the black man. When you're triggered as a man, it's not what's wrong with Pastor Spicer that he's getting on my nerves. There's something internal in me that's being triggered. And I need to have the emotional intelligence to find out, is it one of my insecurities that his language is affecting? And then deal with that first before I respond back to him. Once we begin to do that, we break down our communication to each other as brothers and our adversaries. We can dismantle our adversaries because we know exactly where they're coming. And like you said, I'm not worried. I'm concerned because I know your end game. But once I play my end game is counterintuitive to yours. And my end game is biblical. It's coming from a love perspective.
Yep. One thing I want to, thank you for sharing that. One thing I want to add to, one of my biggest advice to black men is take all the buttons off of your coat. Because people always talk about, man, he pushed my buttons. So-and-so pushed my buttons. What if you just had a Teflon coat? And I'm not saying that things don't affect you, but I think that if you remove the buttons that people can push, there's a saying, resist the devil and he will flee. When they see the the ineffectiveness of pushing on those buttons, they're going to go push on somebody else's buttons, but they'll leave your lack of buttons alone. Go ahead, Pastor.
Well, we're going to move to a close on this discussion. It's a great discussion, and some wonderful words that has been stated and expressed, and with regards to the black male experience in America. This week we celebrated Father's Day, and we're going to build upon this on the close, and I know there's many things that we can talk about and discuss. Even why now is America so aware of the experiences of the black male in America? But we celebrated Father's Day this past week, and what each one of us we can just express, and I think I kind of mentioned something earlier, but just kind of share some of the experiences or the training, the guidance that your father may have given you to help you cope and to deal with the experience of growing up as a black male. Uh,
The experience I got from my father, I grew up with my stepfather. But one thing that he did teach me was love, because he never called me a stepson, you know. So when the trials and tribulations that I went through, when I wasn't there for my kids, when I did get right, I told myself, I'm going to raise these kids until they're 18 and make a better life for them than what I had, because they could have been fatherless too. So I made sure everybody graduated pretty much. I mean, there's a couple of bad seeds, but the experience is just staying bonded and trying to teach them love. Family love is more important than outside love, you know. But now they all grown and they barely even call me. But I love them dearly. But just having that strong fatherhood experience, because, you know, I met my real dad, you know, we bonded for a minute, but it was just like a money thing, you know. It was just like a money thing. You know, he's 75 right now. He made 75 like 2 months ago. We text once a month, you know. I'm always there for him. If some family problems go down, I'm there for him. But as far as him being on the love tip, yeah, nah, he ain't got that. And that kind of made me kind of love my kids a little bit more, let them know, give me a hug. But, you know, being an African American, growing up as a father, especially just say growing up in the ghetto, our children tend to respect their friends more than their family, you know. Where we need to, this pandemic brought us back a little closer, but we shouldn't have to, a pandemic bringing us back closer, you know. We should already be like that. We should already be like that, you know? And that's one thing we losing in touch with ourselves. And this next generation, you know, because I got a granddaughter, she 11. And when she come in, give your grandfather a hug. Now when she was from 1 to probably 5 or 6, oh, it was paw all day long. But that gradually, I paw and keep on moving. Thank you.
For me, it's a blessing to even have my pops here. Yeah, this Donald Smart. This is my pops. Just all of the things that he done went through. Just I don't even know his full story, but just from my lifetime, seeing all of the things that he done went through, it's just like it's a blessing to even know my pops and to see my pops. One of the things, like growing up, I always told everybody, like, I got one of the coolest pops, like that I know. They call him Cool Daddy, so he got it. You know, he got to be for a reason. So when I was young, that was just my mentality. And one of the things that I feel like I learned, what he taught me without really saying it, was just laughter. He never told me to laugh. It's just the things that he would laugh at. And it's like, dang, all of this stuff going on in the world, all of the things you done went through, in and out of prison, you're losing your brothers, and people, all this crazy stuff going on. How is you still able to laugh? And just seeing me in certain situations, everybody always leaned on me because I was always just calm, neutral, and I was able to laugh in any situation. And I felt like that was something that he passed down to me without him even teaching me that verbally. And just another thing that he taught me was just be an individual. No matter where you come from, no matter who you associated with, who you related to, stand as an individual. And that was also taught just how he moved. And when I go into certain places and people, I tell them who my pops is. Hey, Smug your daddy, that's your, oh man, he cool. It's always good things to say. And I seen that wherever I went, I'm like, I want to have that type of name and reputation because I want somebody say my name. It can be a blessing to this person. Just like, oh yeah, Don Tay, yeah, that's my, oh, you, come on, you good. And so that was just another thing, is just doing the best that you can with the resources that you have. And when you don't have nothing, still being able to smile, because can't nobody really take that from you. So yeah, I'll say that.
Yeah, so I think so. My background, my dad died, biological dad died when I was 2 months old. Born October '69, he died December 2nd of '69. My mom ultimately remarried. That marriage didn't work out as well. But what I've learned is this: I've always drawn, and I've always had this in my life. Not so much worried about what was not there, but what was there. And what was there was a lot of my uncles visited and were present in my life. I was the youngest of four boys, so a lot of my brothers, and again, I had Caribbean roots. A lot of we sort of had more of a village mentality, where if you were out of line and someone saw you that was a distant relative, you would get it, and that kept you in line. So I think, but some of those experiences also motivated me to continue to be a father. And I think if it's one thing that I would pass on, and I want to honor all these fathers that are part of the panel, because it's just a myth. I know that there's a high amount of unfathered African American kids, but I think that gets focused, and what gets missed in the focus is all these brothers who are fathers, who are doing a good job, and we're hearing testimonies about it. But the biggest thing that I would tell any black father is really think about your legacy and protecting your legacy. If you do that and you keep that in the back of your mind, you not only would be concerned about your kids, but you'd be concerned about your kids. Complete.
What I can say about my father, he taught me how to work with my hands. He used to take me to work with him. He retired from the city of Richmond, Parks Department. And I can remember when I was 10 years old, if y'all remember when they had the animals there. He used to take me there to feed the animals. And over the years, then I got older. I tried to get a job for the city of Richmond when I was like 15, summer job, and they fired me the first day. Well, later on, years later, I talked to the guy that I was working up under, and he said that was with his supervisors, the job that they gave him that day, because they said two people from the same family can't work at the same job. So that discouraged me. And unfortunately, right today, this is my second time working for the city of Richmond 40 years later. So I thank God for that.
So I'll leave some practical knowledge. My dad, um, I regard my father really highly. He had a very interesting life. I, as mentioned earlier, am of Caribbean roots. I am the baby of some 15 individuals. So my dad is he's long in the tooth, as they would say in America. I still kind of say he was a bit crazy because he was 50 years old when I was born. I don't know if I want that adventure. But he's 92 today, and he's pretty strong and still drives and flies and does crazy things. Um, but he gave me some practical knowledge when I was really younger, and I didn't understand it then, and I understand it now. When I was younger, he told me, get to know the people around you for yourself so no one can ever tell you anything about them. And I didn't understand what that meant. I was like, what do you mean? But have a sincerity and also a vulnerability as I got older. as men, we tend to dig into our silos, into our foxholes, right? And we take this mentality as us against the world, if you will. And very, very rarely do we even take brothers in arms, or do we line up under another man to be mentored, or do we look for another man to mentor? So I would say get to know the brothers around you for yourself. And I would say allow the vulnerability and the transparency of your own life to affect the others around you, whether they're on your level, below you, or above you. I think that's one of the things I've been trying to model, is being vulnerable enough to let people see my life, and then being courageous enough to affect theirs.
Amen. My father was a businessman at the age of 19. He worked for a white man, and he had a good relationship with this white man, so that the white man sold the auto body shop that was in San Pablo on Rumrail here in San Pablo. And he was 19 years old with his, African American male, out of high school in business. And I won't say that we were rich, but we were yet, a family that strive to do, good, to do well. And he worked hard. He was a hard worker, and he instilled those ethics in me. And I think that's why I just keep constantly going, because he instilled that as a young man. We built our own homes, and he taught that to me. Actually, that's how I got into the architecture career, because I kind of said that I don't want to build, but I want to design. So I would sit beside him as a young man, and as he would design, work on the houses that he was building for us to live and to move into, I would sit as a young man and I would draw with him. And I appreciate his teachings and ethics that he placed, in me. And I could have went rebellious, but thanks be to God and the mercy of God that they kept me. He had a stern hand, and because of that, I grew up to be, the man that I am today. On the other hand, I was also raised by my grandfather, who is the former pastor of this church, and because of his blessings in particular, he had a third grade education. In particular, because he was raised in the South, and back in that day, in that time, he was born in 1918. But he was a very wise man, and he had the gift of playing the guitar, and he adopted, he picked up that holiness sound, and it was something for the saints, amen, to rejoice when he would play, because it was the anointing that was on him, that the saints would just love to rejoice and just love to worship. And I kind of missed that sound in the church. He had the gift of laying on hands, and he was just a flat walker teacher that taught, and he iterated everything what he said, repeated until you got it. He was that kind, and he would lay hands. He had the gift of laying hands, and he can work an altar. He and his sister. And they just work an altar, and it was a real truth about it, about holiness churches, because they the moment that they would lay hands on it, they would immediately go into the spirit, and back in those days, that time, there was plenty of blankets, all over the floor, and I thank the Lord, amen, for his teachings, amen, and blessings that he brought for me. Because of him and my father, I was able and learned, in spite of, I had some issues coming up as a young man, but then they kept me straight. And I was because of that, there were doors open to me. I was able to go before other men. It taught me how to go in and out. And because of that, I was able to work with other men that actually became like fathers to me. Dad Macklin, Albert Macklin, Dad Macklin, Senior Macklin. And actually, I worked on their facility. Mingoton Temple, I worked on their facility with Pastor Evans, the interior of the church. I was able to sit before Bishop G.E. Patterson, and he stated before me. I was able to go in and out of his office, and he shared with me that he always wanted a fan. He sat in his chair. He always wanted a fan-shaped church sanctuary, and so I prepared a schematic for him and gave him the schematic which he gave to the developers. And just so many people that because of the blessings of my grandfather. It allowed open doors for me. I was able, even when I was in Los Angeles, and I was told Bishop Blake that I was there, and so he pulled me in and set me on the building committee at the time when I first went in 1997. Mind you, my grandfather passed in 1998. And so I was only on the building committee just for a short period of time under Dr. Hart, in which they were going through the design phases of West Angeles Church. But while I was there and commuting back and forth, I had the opportunity, even during the development, to go on the site and during the development and take pictures and things of that sort. So it was really a great experience. And so I thank the Lord, for the teachings of my father and of my grandfather, and I would not change it for anything. I wouldn't change it for anything. Yes, things could be better. Things could be greater in my life, but I'm most certainly appreciative of being taught and being raised by parents, that also had gone through the civil rights movements and has not only dealt with the oppression, but also knew how to not allow the obstacles that we face, as Black male to diminish their personality. There's an African parable that states that it takes a village to raise a child. And it used to be years ago that was one of the morals that the African American community thrived on as we worked to build and to help one another. God is just marvelous, and He's marvelous how He can just bring Black men of various backgrounds to discuss such a subject as the Black male experience in America and pour their hearts out to those that may hear. Knowing for decades the world for so long have looked down upon us as Black men. There are so many myths and stereotypes that have been delivered to the world through white supremacy, the media, through filming ministry, the music and arts, about the Black man that has construed the true image, character, and integrity of who we really are. And I pray from this segment that as we were transparent to you, that you would come to know who we truly are. God bless you, and may the peace of God, which passes all understanding, may it keep your hearts and mind through Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior.